The first thing I'm going to do is open my camera app, and I'm going to take a selfie. Now I'm going to open up Sketchbook. I'm going to hit the plus sign down at the bottom, create a new sketch. I'm going to use the preset Create. Now the first thing I'm going to do is up at the top, I'm going to go and import an image. I'm going to go to my camera roll, and I'm going to use my selfie. I can use 2 fingers to adjust it. I'm going to resize it. And I'm going to put myself right about here should be good. Say done. I can use 2 fingers to rotate my canvas or the drawing area. Now I'm going to tap and hold that bottom layer so I can drag it up on top of my photograph. And I'm going to use my pen tool, make it a little bit bigger, actually a lot bigger. And now what I want to do is trace over all the most important lines and shapes that I see in my picture. One thing I've found helpful, since I'm using a black pen on top of my black glasses, I can select the photo layer and make it a little bit less opaque. That makes it easier to see what I've drawn and what I haven't. Got to make sure my drawing layer is selected as I go back to draw a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now is, as I said, I want to just trace over all the important lines and shapes that I see on that gorgeous, gorgeous face. I'm going to make it a simpler sort of cartoon version of myself. So I'm not going to get every single detail. I'm thinking about getting more lines and shapes that represent my features, not so focused on getting every detail photorealistic. I can use my fill bucket tool to fill in some of these shapes, but I see I have an opening in that shape. I want to close that before I use my fill bucket. So I'm going to fill that in. I might fill in up here a little bit at the hair. That thumbs up is crucial to realizing what an awesome guy I am. So I want to make sure I include that in this wonderful picture. I want to make sure I close all these shapes before I do anything with the fill bucket. I might make a little bit of a jagged edge around here to capture those highlights that are on here. My personal style tends to be adding a little bit of a jagged shape for a highlight on some portions of my drawing. And I'm going to use my fill bucket again, but I have an opening in that shape, so I need to turn off the fill bucket and fill that in. Now I can use the fill bucket again to fill in that shape. I'll fill in this piece. I'll fill in this piece. And again, there's an opening, so I need to close that gap, turn off the fill bucket. Gotta close it right there at the bottom. There was another gap right here to close, and down here. So now I should be ready to use the fill bucket again here. Let's see how this looks without the photograph. This is a pretty decent image, decent enough for right now. I'm going to turn off my fill bucket, and I'm going to use my pen tool a little bit. I need to now look at this as a drawing and start thinking, what shapes do I want to add to get this a little bit stronger? I'm going to make my glasses a little bit thicker framed. One of the things about a black and white design is you generally always want to have some light shapes and some dark shapes, some thick lines and some thin lines. So I tend to go back and make some of these lines a little bit thicker, just because it makes for a stronger composition. Now, one of the next things I'm going to do is actually change to a white pen tool, and I'm going to add little bridges here. All of my white needs to connect up to the outside somewhere. I cannot have any white shapes that are completely surrounded by black, or they'll fall out when my stencil gets cut. Now, as a final step, I think I'm going to add a little bit of text. And finally, I'm going to look at all that text, and I'm going to add little bridges to all those words. Seems pretty good. So I'm going to go to the top, go to my main menu, share, and I'm going to save the image. In order to make a reusable stencil, I'm going to take a transparency sheet and put it onto my cut mat. Line it up nice and straight. I'm going to put my cut mat onto my Cameo Silhouette cutter and press load cut mat. So I've opened up my Cameo Silhouette Studio, the design software. I'm going to drag and drop the picture that I designed on Sketchbook, and I'm going to rotate it because this is sort of landscape style, and I've got an 8.5 by 11 sheet set up. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, maybe about 7.5 inches. Seems pretty good. More or less centered it on my stencil. Now I'm going to go to my tracing tool, which is right here on the right hand side. I need to select the trace area. So I'm going to drag a big box over all that. I'm going to go to outline, trace the outer edge. Now I'm ready to send it. I want to make sure that I set it to cut. I'm using a blade 4, speed of 5, force of 20, and 2 passes to make sure that it gets through my transparency sheet. And I hit send. And it will go there. Now finally, I'm going to screen print this. So I put my screen down, got my paper, my new fresh cut stencil on top of that. I'm going to close my screen over the top to hold the stencil in place. I'm going to use a palette knife to scoop out a little bit of ink. So that's more than a little bit, but plenty to do what I'm doing. I need to drag the ink with my squeegee, spread it so it goes through my stencil. Remember, I only need to cover my design. I do not need to cover the entire screen. And peel it up, peel my paper off, and there we go.